From the moment of her birth, she would suffer incredible pain, and quite possibly a lifetime of pain for little gain. We thought about her suffering. Suffering made all the difference in the world. That was how a woman, a mother, described her decision to abort her child 7 months into her pregnancy. And I know everyone in this room today never gets comfortable hearing those words. But you can only begin to visualize the first time that I read that blog and realized that the diagnosis that drove baby Rachel's mother to terminate that child's life, the diagnosis that she laid in her mother's womb, growing inside with, is the very same diagnosis that I sit here today with. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that baby Rachel's story is not unique in America. It's commonplace. Baby Rachel joins nearly 1 million children in the United States who are aborted each year. But our culture of death, it doesn't end with that statistic. 5 states in our union currently have laws that protect doctor-assisted suicide, so-called death with dignity laws. An additional 18 states are considering such legislation this year alone. And half of the states in our union have considered such legislation at least once. This culture of death is a crisis for our nation. And on the matters of life and human dignity, on the matter of life, we cannot be wrong. We can't get this wrong. This is about, that's right. This is about the fiber of our making, and it is about the character of our great nation. This is about the laws of our land. It's about the justices and the decisions of our courts. And it is about the opportunity that we as conservative activists have to renew hope in the dignity of life in America. This is about our opportunity to renew an appreciation for life in every form, at every stage, and for every single human being. So today we're going to talk not just about the facts, about what's going on in our nation around death, but we're going to talk about what we as conservatives can do about it when we return home from CPAC. So I want to start by introducing the 3 great Americans who joined me on the stage today. We're gonna talk about this. We're gonna talk about what we can do. To my right here, I have Lenny McAllister. Lenny is a radio and TV host. He's also a candidate for the House of Representatives in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in talking to Lenny, I realized very quickly that his greatest accomplishment goes along with the number 4. He has 4 great kids, so welcome. I also have Gianna Jessen. And Gianna, she lives a life that wasn't exactly always meant to be. On Gianna's birth certificate, it doesn't just read that she was born in an abortion clinic in California. It reads that she was born while surviving an abortion. Her her prognosis was that she would never walk or lift her head. But I'm pretty sure that she lifts her head quite high when she goes before organizations like the United States Congress and talks about the pro-life movement in America. And finally today, we are joined by Father Ben Johnson. He is the U.S. Bureau Chief of LifeSite News. He's been a guest host of Nothing But the Truth with Crane Durham on the AFR Talk Radio Network. And he is a relentless advocate for human dignity across the entire lifespan. So thank you, panelists. And panelists, I want to jump right in. I want to get to the heart of the matter. Most of us in this room have probably been pro-life for most of our lives. We may have come to that realization at different points. But even if we've been pro-life our whole life, there are moments where the truth reveals itself, where it crystallizes in a way that doesn't just change our hearts and our minds, but it changes the way that we also talk and we speak on behalf of the voiceless. And I'd love for each of you to tell us one of those moments. I suspect there's been many in your lives. One of those moments that the truth revealed itself. And then how has it changed your message? And how can it change the message of all of these great conservatives who are going to head back to their hometowns at the end of CPAC? So Lenny, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, I'm very thankful to be here today. And I know that when we were talking about this on the phone over the last week, that I started thinking about what moments were those for me. A lot of times when people, quote unquote, choose abortion, and that's what choice is. It's choosing abortion. It's not a woman's choice, it's choosing abortion. Let's be honest.
That's right.
When I was at that moment, at two different points of time in my life, two moments where people choose not to have kids when they find out they're pregnant with life. When I was 21 years old and when I was 41 years old. When I felt that I was too young to have a child, and some would say I was too old to have a child. But when you hold that sonogram, and when I was 21, my daughter who's doing great in grad school right now, I slept every single night with that picture underneath my pillow. I don't even have it anymore because it's so ripped up and shredded and everything else. But I fell in love with that person at 4 months gestation. Just the same when we had our last child, 40 years old. My wife and I find out that we're pregnant again. You fall in love immediately. Now, what does that do to you when you fall in love at 21 and eventually at 41? You understand that pro-life principles are a lifestyle, not a choice. I know I resemble President Obama, but unlike President Obama, I didn't feel like I was being punished with the pregnancy like he said about his daughters. Life is not a punishment. Life is a gift from God that we have the obligation to embrace and elevate with every policy and every step of our lives.
I would say, for me, the moment that changed my life, and has changed every moment ever since, is the moment that I gave my life to Christ. I am unashamedly a Christian. I don't believe that you can survive being burned alive in your mother's womb for 18 hours and have the gift of cerebral palsy without Jesus. And I don't mean I don't mean what I've termed the cocktail party Jesus, the one that keeps the neighbors happy and never offends anyone and never really, that Jesus doesn't exist, but I mean the Jesus that raises the dead and makes the lame to walk. And so I am his girl. You don't mess with me because my father runs the world. That's the deal.
It's not every day I get out preached. It's probably auspicious that I'm speaking about this at CPAC. I actually became pro-life because of politics. I was always very politically active as a child, and Ronald Reagan was my hero. I agreed with him on every issue, from supply-side economics, national defense, foreign policy, but I disagreed with him on abortion. I was a pro-choice atheist. And as time went on in the 1988 presidential campaign, when George Bush was running, he was pro-life. And several of the people who were with him talked to me, and they said, you need to think about what's being done to the child. And you need to think when life begins. And so as an atheist and someone who's interested in science, I began to study, when does science say that life begins? And there is a scientific consensus that life begins at the moment of what they call fertilization, we would call conception. That's when a new, distinct, unique human being comes into the world. And if there's a new human being in the world, under our constitutional form of government, that means that child is endowed with all the rights of our constitutional system, including the right to life. We do not kill innocent people without due process of the law. Because of that, I changed my view. And thankfully, these people were also evangelical Christians, and after a while, they changed my mind about the existence of another form of life I didn't believe in.
Wow. So Father Ben, I want to stay with you for a minute. You know, when we think about being pro-life, we gravitate towards the beginning of life, at conception, like you were just talking about. But I want to go to the end of life for a moment. I want to go to when the person has run the race, when she's lived a great life. And perhaps her suffering, as many use to think about why they justify abortions, the suffering of the child, but newfound suffering at the end of life. You know, advocates for doctor-assisted suicide argue that death with dignity laws protect individuals from going and getting a prescription and choosing for themselves to quietly end their own lives on their own terms because of their own perceptions of suffering. I want to talk for a minute about that, Father Ben, and I want to hear from you. Why is it dangerous to society that 18 states in our union are currently, in 2016, considering laws to protect doctor-assisted suicide? Why is that dangerous?
It's dangerous on numerous fronts. To begin with, assisted suicide violates the Hippocratic Oath. It's the definition of what medicine is that they save people, they do not kill people. And the oath that every doctor has to take is that they will preserve life, not take it. So it's a violation of medicine in itself. Second of all, there's this idea that this is a matter of choice, but this choice, like every choice, and this crowd should understand, every choice is subject to government coercion. For example, it reminds me of the case of Barbara Wagner, 64-year-old woman in Oregon in the year 2008 who had a recurrence of lung cancer. And she petitioned, she was on the state health care program, Oregon Health Plan, and she had asked for the right to have the medication she needed to survive, which cost $4,000 a month. They sent her a letter back saying they would not pay for the medicine, but they would gladly pay for her assisted suicide.
Oh, this is the reality of these laws.
Yes, and imagine if we get a single-payer healthcare system nationally with a future Democratic or Republican president. That could be reality from coast to coast in the United States. So government coercion is an issue. And then there's also the fact that many of the people who are requesting this are not terminally ill. The people who are doing so because they're depressed. There was a study by Harvard University which found that only 10% of the people who requested this were, only 10% of terminally ill cancer patients requested assisted suicide. In the Netherlands, less than half the people who ask for assisted suicide are doing so because of pain. The majority are doing so, they say, because they are depressed. And the author of that study was Zeke Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother, the architect of Obamacare.
Wow.
So they know that they are lying through their teeth if they say that this is because of pain. It's completely immoral in terms of what they're pushing. And then finally, we would say that when we speak of end of life, we get a certain picture in our minds of when that would be, usually ripe old age, someone who's suffering away. The reality is something different. If you want to see where America will be in 20 years if we adopt this, look at Europe.
That's right.
And this is where they've legalized assisted suicide. In Europe, in the Netherlands, for example, the age of consent for assisted suicide is 12 years old. Not to be outdone, in 2014, the King of Belgium signed a law eliminating all age restrictions for assisted suicide. So children as young as 9 years old have been approved for assisted suicide around the world. Wow. So that's not the picture we usually have in our mind.
No.
People are dying because they're depressed. They're not dying at a ripe old age, and it violates the Hippocratic Oath. These are very dangerous. I think the most dangerous thing is it forecloses hope. It inspires the worst in us. It pours cold water upon what's best in us, and it violates the very fiber of what we're about as a nation.
Yes. So I wanna stay on that, because I think what you're getting at is there's a slippery slope backwards. It isn't just about someone who is truly in their final days, as those on the left supporting these laws would make us think. This is about people in their lives who also feel pressured to say, I'm just too much of a burden on people.
Yes.
Gianna, I want to talk about that because, there's a famous statistic that most of us know out there that 90% of children who are diagnosed with Down syndrome are aborted before they're born, and that's just Down syndrome. But 90% of adults with Down syndrome report being happy and fulfilled in their lives. It's kind of amazing to think that somehow there are people who are going to feel that they're too much of a burden. Gianna, can you talk a little bit about what you think we need to do as a society to strengthen our culture around seeing people for their potential, seeing people that for the value that they bring, no matter what form of life they've taken on?
You know, I think that, cerebral palsy for me is such a gift, and I've had to learn to walk twice. My prognosis, as you mentioned earlier, was horrible. No one ever expected me to dare to try to complete 2 marathons by running on my toes for 7 and 8.5 hours. And when my balance gets better, I have every intention of trying to figure out how to climb a mountain of some kind. But the thing is, I think it's such arrogance for the healthy person to look at the person that they perceive as disabled or unworthy of life and say, I'm going to say what your quality of life is. I'm going to sort of put my own perceptions. I think that we have forgotten as a society that we often learn wisdom from the weakest among us. And you can imagine how horrified I am when I hear the argument, as someone who survived a saline abortion, if the baby is disabled, we need to terminate the pregnancy. Who does that sound like, Adolf Hitler? And who are you? You have no idea, people, the amount of beauty and joy and happiness that I have because I must lean on the strong arm of Jesus, limping all the way to heaven. I have more happiness than most people I meet who are whining about nothing. One of the we are creating and cultivating a nation of victims. And I am telling you, I am no victim. I am a victor because of Christ and what he has done for me. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
I think you gave a great answer.
So that means I did.
Yes. So I want to stay on the topic of pain and the perception of preventing people from suffering. And Lenny, let's start this conversation with you. But I think all of our panelists have a perspective on this. The Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, passed in the House, didn't get through the Senate, says ban abortion after 20 weeks. Because we know scientifically, there's no argument there, that at 20 weeks a baby can feel pain.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're ripping that child out of the child's womb, out of his mother's womb, one limb at a time, he is feeling and experiencing his own death in a gruesome manner. screaming for life inside. Lenny, right now, this hasn't passed. States have various versions. What can we do as conservative activists to rise up? I mean, this doesn't go far enough in many people's views that are in the room today. But what is our response now that that piece of legislation didn't pass the Senate?
I think the first thing we have to do is, a lot of us talk from a secular perspective when it comes to our conservatism. But we can tie it into this and make it holistic very easily. The Declaration of Independence does not say choice, liberty in the pursuit of happiness. It says life, liberty in the pursuit of happiness. And simply put, you cannot pursue happiness, you cannot have liberty, you cannot allow an all-loving, all-freeing, all-powerful God to be able to bless America on a regular basis if you do not celebrate life in all forms, in all ways, and understand that we can get the wisdom, the grace, the talents that we need to keep America the greatest country on this earth without getting it from different sections of the country, which includes protecting life in the mother's womb and allowing God to be able to work miracles every single day. America is a miracle. We talk about that from a secular perspective, but when you really think about how we are able to form our economy, form our laws, be able to educate 300 million people to be talented, to be strong, to be focused, to disagree but move things forward. That's God working in our lives every single day. Why would we restrict that at 20 weeks or less or 20 weeks or more? It should be life all the way across the board.
So I want to grab onto something that you were just talking about. You were talking about the gifts of, bringing life into the world. And I think you were also pointing at there's many people with talents and gifts who can bring comfort, forms of healing to others. We're a divided nation a bit on the issues around cloning and testing on embryos that are thrown away. And, Lenny, Father Ben, when you think about the dangers of cloning and embryonic testing, many of us are grateful, I know I am, for advances in medicine and technology. But there are dangers, too, that we're trading off. Father Ben, can you talk to us a little bit about what are those, why is embryonic testing so dangerous? Why is that another slippery slope, like the one we were just talking about with end of life?
Well, embryonic research has been vastly overhyped. So much so, of course, many of us remember John Edwards in the year 2004 promised that Christopher Reeve would get up out of that chair and walk. Sounded like he was in my profession, not in his. And John Edwards was promising these cures that were going to come about. The fact of the matter is embryonic stem cell research has not delivered, so much so that one of its foremost advocates, Michael J. Fox, who has financed stem cell research with his own foundation, said 4 years ago that it has not produced, and in fact they're looking to other avenues for cures for Parkinson's. So that has not produced. But where it gets really dangerous is the fact that when we're dealing, we use the term embryo, but what we're talking about is a newly fertilized, a newly created human being. This is another distinct person. And the idea that we should create human beings and then harvest their organs for the good of science is tremendously dangerous.
Some may argue that there's similarities between that form of testing and the testing and the research that goes on after baby parts are bought and traded on the black market post-abortion.
Well, there's no question that it completely disregards the value and the dignity of human life. We do not allow in this country innocent people to be killed for any reason, no matter what greater good might be served for it. If we were going to pass a law like that, we might as well pass a law. How many people here are organ donors? Quite a few. We might as well pass a law that if someone needs a heart, we can kill an organ donor, take their organs, and give them away. We'd be sure to save someone's life that way. We could say that the greater good would be served because many people's lives would be saved at the expense of one life. But if you believe that a human being has come into existence at the moment of conception, it is no less immoral to take their stem cells than it is to take the organs of any other human being.
But yet right now in America, various states have various rules about abortion. Some require, a waiting period. Some require you see the child on ultrasound. If you're done with your embryos, you've had your children and you have a couple left over, you just sign a form one day on your way to work. You're all set. You can destroy life that way, that easily.
That's true. That's the law as it stands. There is such a thing as embryonic adoption. That's a separate issue as well.
Yes.
And separate ethical issue. But the fact of the matter is, as I say, embryonic stem cell research has not produced, and regardless of what the future of these children are, they are separate individual human beings who deserve all the constitutional protections our system gives them. And in speaking as someone who wears a collar, they are children of God and they deserve our love and respect.
So I want to build off of that, cloning. It's not something we talk a ton about, although the dangers of designer babies became a little bit more real when we found out last week. There is a famous couple in Hollywood who recently chose the gender of their child as they were designing their child. To any of my panelists, what are the dangers if science does advance? We get to the point of cloning. What does that do to our society? Why is that so wrong?
Well, it goes to the idea that we can create life like we create machines. When we talk about life, we're not just talking about physical beings walking around. We're talking about the touch of God being involved from the moment of conception throughout natural death. That's what we call life. When you start changing that definition, then you start allocating who can create quote-unquote life. And as we well know, as soon as government gets involved in anything, government thinks that they do it best. Now, if you take that and couple it with universal health care that's paid for by government, now, if you think that you have a problem with picking winners and losers when it comes to business, let's take it 25 years down the road from a scientific standpoint if we don't stop this now, where we start picking winners and losers when it comes to organ harvesting, when it comes to who should live, who should die, what population should grow, and what people should not have kids. We've already gone through this. There's a reason why people are so opposed to Planned Parenthood. We're not talking about the future. We're talking about repeating the past. We just simply can't afford to do it.
That's right. We can't afford to do it, and we can't not just repeat some of those mistakes in the future, but going back to some of our earlier conversations on the matters of life, whether it be from the moment the child is conceived to living, to the moments where we take some of our last breaths. We can't get this wrong. We can't afford to get it wrong as a society. I want to ask each of you, we have a lot of great activists in our community, in our audience today. When we return home to our hometowns across this great nation over the weekend, what's a behavior we can start? A question we can have in our back pocket when we meet someone who argues that we can destroy life at a whim and when we want? What's that one thing, that one tactical thing that everyone in this room can start to do today?
Go to the people that voted for President Obama and say, if you voted for hope and change in 2008, how come the people that are living in the wombs that you want to destroy, how come they can't have hope as well? We're a nation of hope. We're a nation that believes that you can come from humble beginnings and create your own businesses, create your own institutions, change the pathway of your family tree, and make your communities greater and America greater as a result. If you vote for hope and change in 2008, how come the unborn child can't have hope to do the same exact thing? That's hypocritical, and it's wrong, and it's un-American.
So that's the question you would take to your friends.
That's exactly the first question you got to put on your doorstep.
That's great.
I think it's important to really deal with abortion when you're communicating with people that are opposing you with tremendous love and honor and respect, and start by asking them if they realize how incredibly valuable they are, and if anyone has ever told them that, especially in the eyes of God, that they're loved and not forgotten. And begin with them, and then educate them about pregnancy resource centers that are all across the nation that provide free and confidential services.
Planned Parenthood's not your only option.
Absolutely, amen to that, sister. And so I think that's a practical thing to bring into the equation. But also, I realize as well that there are people probably here that have been involved with abortion.
Absolutely.
And I want to say that I don't believe in shame. I have forgiven my biological mother for what she has done. I also don't believe that this is just a woman's issue. It is also, it takes two people to create a life. I believe, and I'm almost done, that I'm trying to hurry, trying to get it in, that we have emasculated men in this culture, and I think that is wrong. And I believe, hang on, that men are made to defend women and children. And men, if you don't want to see this country go to hell, stand up and take it back and defend your women. That may or may not be acceptable in this room, and I really don't care.
You're getting a pretty good response. All right, Father Ben, one thing every single person in this room can start to do on Monday morning.
Well, I know that when I'm speaking to this room, I'm speaking to a lot of future elected officials, present elected officials as well, but future elected officials, future Hill staffers, people who will be leaders in the think tanks and in political movements for years to come. I would ask each one of them to consider, all of you have talents that have been given to you by God, just like Rush Limbaugh. You have talent on loan from God. I would ask each of you to consider whether you should use that talent or have the ability to use that talent full-time in the pro-life movement. So consider whether it is that of all the issues that are important to you, if this issue doesn't take priority and precedence over every other. Unless life is secure, no other issue is secure. No freedom that we have can be secure without the right to life. So I'd ask them to consider that. And people say, what happens if we go through and the pro-life movement's successful and we don't have a movement to go on anymore? I'd say, hallelujah. I always tell them the same thing. Go ahead, get the degree. If we take care of abortion, assisted suicide, and eugenics in the next 4 years, we'll get to work on the next great human rights movement.
And I think you hit on a good point for everyone in this room. It isn't just about being pro-life for babies. It's about talking about eugenics. It's about knowing the dangers of doctor-assisted suicide. And mask it or not and call it death with dignity, it is the same thing. It is that slippery slope into euthanasia. I think that's a great point. I want to thank our panelists for all of these great points, because these are important points for all of us to take back. It isn't just about continuing to speak up on behalf of infants and babies and to defend their lives so that they can join us here on earth. But it's also about speaking up and saying people with disabilities, they add value to our communities. It's about talking about the end of life. It's about saying we shouldn't say that suffering is too much, but it's a part of our human experience, and how do we care for those individuals instead of just giving them a prescription to end their life, and the dangers of that. So I encourage all of you to think about these and to think about what you're doing each and every day as you meet your fellow constituents, your fellow voters, and you meet with your elected officials, whether you are one or you're planning to be one or you're meeting with them. I think these are all great key takeaways that we have to take back to our communities and continue to fight to restore the character of our great nation when it comes to the matters of life. I want to close with one fact and one call. Since the time that this panel has sat on this stage, 60 children in the United States have been aborted since this panel came out. And if that isn't alarming, I don't know what statistic is. You can take all of these facts and all of these great ways to defend life back, and I want you to remember one thing. It's the thing that I remember when I'm thinking about protecting all of the voices. It's how the woman, the mother of that baby Rachel at 7 months, that baby that she terminated because she might turn out like me. She said of baby Rachel, "I wonder if she would have been a fighter." I wonder if she would have been a fighter. I'd like to think so. But we'll never know. What I do know is that we can take these facts and we can take these actions back to our hometowns, and we can be not just baby Rachel's fighter. We can be the fighters of every voice in America that has been taken too soon. We can be those fighters. Thank you. Thank you all.